Casefile 04. The Unprocessed Wartime file. Opening context. This casefile was compiled following routine maintenance activity within restricted underground areas connected to the former airfield site. No irregularity was reported at the time. The activity did not arise from an incident, a complaint, or a request for review. It began as scheduled facilities work. The purpose was consolidation, clearance, and preparation for future reallocation of space. At the time this work commenced, no anomaly was anticipated. The casefile exists because material was encountered that could not be resolved through standard processing, despite no rule being clearly breached. The underground environment. The underground sections beneath the former airfield have accumulated through layered use rather than planned continuity. Some areas were constructed for wartime operations. Others were added later, repurposed, or partially sealed. Over time, responsibility for these spaces shifted between departments, contractors, and interim custodians. Not all transitions were fully documented. As a result, the underground environment operates as a hybrid space. It is neither a preserved historical site nor a fully modern facility. Its function is defined more by what remains accessible than by what was intended. Storage areas exist alongside transit corridors. Some spaces are catalogued. Others persist through continued use rather than formal designation. It was within this context that routine clearance work took place. The initiating action. The activity that led to this casefile involved workspace consolidation. Items were reviewed for retention, disposal, or transfer. The process followed existing guidelines. No deviation was noted during the initial stages. During this work, a storage area was opened that was not listed as an archive. The space did not contain signage, accession markers, or inventory references. Its contents were not catalogued within current systems. This was not immediately treated as unusual. Unlisted storage areas are not uncommon in older facilities. Materials are often retained beyond their original purpose, awaiting later review or disposal. The contents were therefore transferred for routine assessment. It was at this stage that the material began to diverge from expectation. Initial identification of the material. The material consisted of paper records. Initial inspection indicated a World War II origin. This assessment was not based on a single feature. It emerged from a combination of formatting, terminology, and paper stock consistent with the period. The documents did not appear curated or preserved for historical value. They showed signs of long-term storage rather than intentional archiving. There were no modern accession labels. No digitization references were attached. No cross-indexing tags were present. The material had not been integrated into contemporary archival systems. At this point, the documents were not treated as significant. They were treated as misplaced. The expectation was that routine processing would clarify their status. Processing expectations. Under standard procedure, legacy documents encountered outside designated archives are processed in one of three ways. They are either matched to an existing archival reference, transferred to an appropriate repository, or scheduled for disposal following verification. In most cases, one of these outcomes occurs quickly. The documents in question did not immediately resist this process. They entered modern systems without generating errors. This initial compliance is part of what delayed recognition of the anomaly. Under normal conditions, this stage of processing resolves uncertainty quickly. Legacy material either finds a destination, or it fails visibly. When reference numbers terminate without resolution, the system typically redirects the material to a review queue. When authorization exists without receipt, the discrepancy is logged as a routing error. When cross-references do not resolve, they are treated as indexing failures rather than material anomalies. In this case, none of those corrective paths activated. The documents did not trigger review escalation. They did not generate routing errors. They did not fail indexing checks in a way the system recognized as actionable. Each inconsistency existed just below the threshold required to force resolution. This is not typical. Normally, one inconsistency is sufficient to collapse the process in one direction or another. Here, multiple inconsistencies coexisted without reinforcing one another. The system treated each as tolerable in isolation. Taken together, they should not have been tolerable at all. The first inconsistencies. When the documents were entered into record systems, some metadata fields populated automatically. Dates aligned with known historical frameworks. Certain formatting elements were recognized. Reference structures appeared familiar. Other fields did not populate. This alone was not unusual. Legacy documents frequently lack complete metadata compatibility. Partial recognition is common. However, further review revealed inconsistencies that did not resolve with routine clarification. Authorization markings were present, but no receiving department was recorded. This was not a case of redaction. There was no indication that the information had been removed. It appeared never to have been entered. Reference numbers aligned with known systems, yet terminated without closure. Cross-references pointed to files that do not exist in surviving indexes. None of these inconsistencies, taken alone, would have required escalation. Together, they formed a pattern that could not be reconciled. Pattern recognition. At this stage, the material ceased to behave like misplaced paperwork and began to behave like an interrupted process. The documents did not contradict known records. They did not contain unexpected claims or anomalous language. Instead, they occupied an administrative position that should not exist. They were formatted correctly. They followed recognized procedural structures. They carried appropriate authority markings. What they lacked was completion. This absence was not random. Across the material, the same type of incompleteness recurred. Authorization without receipt. Reference without closure. Classification without destination. The repetition of this structure, rather than the content itself, constituted the anomaly. This type of anomaly is difficult to detect because it does not fail loudly. Systems are designed to recognize singular breakdowns. A missing file, an invalid reference, or a rejected entry typically forces attention by exceeding tolerance thresholds. In this case, no single element exceeded those thresholds. Each inconsistency remained within acceptable bounds when assessed independently. The anomaly only exists when the material is considered as a whole. This places it outside the system's primary detection mechanisms. It is not a fault that triggers correction. It is a condition that persists because nothing identifies it as actionable. The system does not resolve it, not because it cannot, but because it is never required to. This distinction explains how the documents remain present without being addressed. They do not demand intervention. They merely continue. System behavior. Modern systems did not reject the documents. They did not flag them as invalid. They did not trigger alerts. Instead, the systems behaved as though the documents were anticipated. Certain fields accepted data without issue. Others remained unresolved, but without generating fault conditions. The system treated the documents as partially processed rather than incorrect. This response is consistent with how modern systems handle interrupted workflows rather than invalid inputs. In effect, the system behaved as if the documents were awaiting a step that never occurred. The role of absence. No witness testimony was associated with the documents. No staff recollections were logged. No correspondence explained their storage. No decision record authorized their retention. This absence was not absolute. Records exist around the documents. What is missing are records about the documents. There is no indication of intent, error, or intervention. The absence itself forms a shape. In routine cases, absence follows predictable patterns. A missing record is usually accompanied by a trace, a placeholder entry, a reference to later reconciliation, an explanatory note indicating temporary removal, transfer, or loss. Absence normally points to an event. In this case, it does not. What is absent is not a document, but a phase. There is no indication that the process failed. There is no indication that it was interrupted by instruction. There is no indication that it concluded informally. Instead, the sequence simply ends. The expected final actions never occur. The documents remain structurally mid-process, without evidence of deviation or correction. This type of absence is uncommon. It suggests neither error nor intent. It suggests disengagement. The system did not close the file. It did not reopen it. It moved on. It suggests not concealment, but abandonment. Not deletion, but discontinuity. The process did not conclude. It simply stopped. Historical context without interpretation. The document's wartime origin introduces historical depth, but not historical explanation. They do not reference experimental projects, covert operations, or exceptional circumstances. Their language is administrative. Their purpose appears routine. Nothing within the material suggests significance beyond its procedural role. This is relevant. If the documents had been exceptional, their misplacement might have been expected. Their mundanity is what renders their survival anomalous. Procedural weighting. At this stage, the material was evaluated according to current document handling hierarchy. The documents themselves were not high weight. The pattern they revealed was the absence of closure across multiple administrative dimensions elevated the case beyond routine misfiling. This did not mandate investigation. It did, however, prevent closure. Resolution without resolution. The documents were logged. They were assigned a temporary holding status. They were flagged for clarification. No investigation was opened. No corrective action was mandated. The process concluded normally. The anomaly remained. This outcome reflects how institutions manage historical incompleteness. Systems are not designed to resolve every inconsistency. They are designed to prioritize active risk, operational relevance, and present-day accountability. Where none of those are identified, tolerance becomes the default state. Over time, tolerated inconsistencies cease to be anomalies in practice. They become background conditions. Files remain open without being active. Processes are considered complete without being concluded. This is not negligence. It is a function of scale. Large systems cannot resolve all legacy material without paralyzing themselves. Instead, they learn to coexist with unresolved fragments. The documents described in this case occupy that space. They are not important enough to escalate. They are not trivial enough to discard. They persist because nothing requires them to do otherwise. This outcome is not unusual. Systems are designed to tolerate incomplete legacy material where no active risk is identified. The presence of unresolved documents does not, on its own, constitute a failure state. What is recorded here is not an error, but a tolerated inconsistency. Peripheral context. The former airfield site has accumulated informal references over time. Some accounts are speculative. Others are contradictory. These references were logged for completeness. They were not engaged with. They were not treated as explanatory. They do not intersect with the documented material in any procedural sense. Closing assessment. This case file remains open. All required procedures have been completed. No further action is indicated. The records do not identify an error. They indicate an interruption. Status: Casefile 04, open. Procedurally complete.